Thank you for the introduction. It's really my pleasure to chair this roundtable, the last roundtable. We will try to control the time so that it will not cause any delay for you for the next session. But I was commissioned to chair this roundtable. Actually, I have a wrong understanding. I understand the cohesive culture. Originally, I only understood it as a national culture. But actually, during the whole process, I think culture exists everywhere. Culture can be a scientific culture, communication culture. Culture can also exist in different national culture, or can also exist in the institutional level. So what we are going to do is to have our panelists first briefly introduce themselves and then to share their insight on what we are talking for is communicating science for cohesive culture. But I will start by making our panelists to share what is they observe the non-cohesive thing. What science or what communicating science process can be caused by non-cohesive culture, or can even make the culture not so cohesive. And then we are going to discuss what can be done to make science, to communicate science, to be more cohesive. And finally, maybe is some of the measures that we can use to strengthen our science communication field to promote a more cohesive culture. So it's roughly this order. So now let's our panelists from here to briefly introduce themselves. Shirley? Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Jia. And good morning, audience. My name is Shirley Ho. I am from Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. I think, this morning our panel is very diverse. We have representatives from, different cultures. And I guess my research area in science communication and public perceptions, towards emerging science and technology, especially in the context of Singapore and also the Asia region, should, be able to offer some different perspective to this panel today. Yeah.
Danny?
Good morning, everyone. I'm from Buffalo, New York, which is part of the State University of New York. And I actually was educated originally back in China. I went to Fudan University for my undergraduate, and then went to America for my master's, PhD. We went to the same PhD institution with Dr. Jia. So thanks for putting this all together. So my research is primarily focused on risk communication. My central interest is actually on how people perceive risk in different contexts, ranging from environmental issues, health issues, technological issues, and how risk perception influences the way that people communicate about risk issues and make decisions in those, emergency crisis kind of situation. So I think, coming from America, I'm definitely more kind of traditional in my training for communication research, but throughout the last few days, I feel like there's so many we can learn from each other, and also to think how we can use science communication as a tool, probably to also bridge those gaps and make people from different cultures and different contexts to be able to communicate more effectively with each other regarding science issues, and probably more broadly relate to many other social issues. So very nice to meet all of you.
Hello, my name is Anna Dijkstra, and I'm in the Netherlands, the University of Twente. I'm an associate professor there in the field of science communication. And recently I set up a new research center for science communication and public engagement at the university. And I think, since I'm based in Europe, I have a more European perspective. And actually I started out a little bit in the crossing, or the crossroads between risk communication, science communication, and science technology studies, because my supervisor was in risk communication. So for the first few years of my PhD, I only went to the Society of Risk Analysis conferences, and then I started participating in the science communication community. So that's a little bit the perspective that I can offer.
Thanks. Hello everyone. My name is Jianxun Jianxun. You can call me Jackson. The pronunciation is similar. I come from USTC, University of Science and Technology of China. This is ours mostly major in the science communication, but also I do some of the research on the risk communication, especially in the Harvard Kennedy School. We study some of the disasters, this kind of things, how to push the communication, media and the public, this kind of things. And also we involved in some of the science communication. For example, how to make the public know the dangerous these kind of things. Just like Hefei City, recently we have some of the, maybe rumor is earthquake recently, but we need some of the science communication.
Thank you. Probably maybe use that next here. Yeah.
Okay. As it has been said, my name is Herbert Batta. I am at the University of Oyo. I have been there for the past 25 years, and I got into science communication. I could say I introduced myself to it because science communication is very nascent in Nigeria, and I introduced myself to it because I had a little background in paramedical work, and so when I changed work to communication studies, I decided that I'm going to steer the route on science communication. So my first contact with PST was in 2012 at the Firenze PCST conference. After that, I did one in Brazil, and perhaps last year I did a science communication conference in Japan. So one of the things that we could say would make for a non-cohesive culture of science is the inability of scientists themselves to work with those who are not scientists. And then that sort of puts science in a box and doesn't allow science to permeate. I speak for my country in this instance. And then what we are trying to do is to see how we can collaborate through teaching, through speaking across the disciplines to make science communication a little broader. Thank you.
Yeah, so Herbert, you may continue because you raised the issue, so I want to continue as, for the issue you raised, how do you think in your particular situation as in Nigeria or in Africa or the other things you may think of as what are the particularity for the non-cohesive issue in the science communication process as you observe?
Okay. One of the things I have said already is that science scholars operate on their own, and then social science scholars operate on their own, humanities scholars operate on their own. And that's non-cohesive. For instance, if we were to collaborate, maybe we'll see how science can interface with the humanities, how science can interface with the social science. It will make a better science communication culture. That's number one. Number two, there is a disconnect between the industry and the academia. So people in the industry sort of work on their own, while people in the academia work on their own. They come to conferences like this, they make publications, and then stuff it back in the libraries. So there's got to be a way to make scientific researches go into the society. Journalists try to do that, but increasingly, journalists are also becoming fewer in science communication because it is more expensive to train science communicators. Indeed, I can give you an experience. When I was a student in the undergraduate days, the only thing we could do was specialized reporting. And I thought it was wrong because you could specialize in so many things. Food and nutrition, you could specialize in sports, religion, and all of that. And you can't box everything into specialized reporting. So I got to talk to my seniors, so let's desegregate some of these things. And so we started for the undergraduate program, courses in health communication separately, courses in environmental communication, and then science and tech reporting, so that we can have students train in those different areas and become a specialist, so that they can fit the industry. Because you go to the industry, they like reporting sports, they like reporting gossip, more than they report science and technology. Whereas in our society, we depend more on the outputs of science and technology for a better living.
Thank you. Yeah, so Jianxun, would you want to share some of your points?
Okay, thank you. Just to follow the African culture, maybe I can share some of the. Sorry. Hello. Okay. Yeah. Can share some ideas about China or Chinese culture. Based on my feeling, the most science communication in China, the popular thing is for the kids and for the elder. This is, the education in all the Chinese family is the most important thing. So a lot of the students, a lot of kids, they join all kinds of the we call the STEM, this kind of education or the science communication. That is very popular. Another part is the elder. A lot of the older women or older men, they have a lot of time and they have money. So now a lot of kind of the medical medicine or the life science communication, health communication, they focus on this kind of the people. So this is two parts. Another thing we think, another two parts is growing. One is for the official, another for the for the organizations. Because a lot of the leaders in Chinese government, they pay more attention to the high tech or innovation, this kind of things. So they have this kind of the motivation to receive a lot of the science communication. That is a good news. Another thing is a lot of organizations, just like the CAST, the whole country, from the central government to all the local governments, they have a lot of the people in these kind of organizations to push the science communication. This is my feeling.
Thank you. So Annie, before you start, I want to, because last year PCST was held in the Netherlands, and you are a major organizer of the camp. So in addition to the European perspective you want to share, I also want to add a request is how, when you are talking about your situation, is what this situation can be related to. Some of the issue in the PCST discussion, I mean, when PCST people discuss this kind of different things, this kind of thing, and so when you share your point about your opinion about this cohesive, non-cohesive thing, maybe do you think any of these issues have been raised in the PCST circle?
If I understand correctly, maybe I start with an example maybe of a European perspective, but also the Dutch debates about science. I think the topics that raised the most debates were controversial issues, like in the 1990s where we had the public debates about genetic modification and cloning, etc., etc. And I think that also raised more awareness for the importance of communicating, or the importance of understanding the societal aspects of technology. So in my PhD project, I participated in a program that was called the societal aspects of genomics. But you see that now also in the Netherlands, that if we apply for research funding, they now ask not only scientists, natural scientists or engineers to apply, but we always have to do that. Many of the calls are that you collaborate with social scientists, with philosophy, social scientist perspective, and include those findings from those areas to understand better what are the controversial issues or the non-cohesive issues, I would say. Regarding the PCST, I think the interesting point from PCSTs, and that was maybe also raised in Rotterdam, is that there's such a big variety. So some of it seems non-cohesive, but I think if you look at the motives for science communication, one of the things that can be looking at those motives, that can also be a vehicle for getting a more cohesive idea about what you can do in science communication, how you can maybe approach issues in the field of science communication.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so Jenny, before we start, I also want to add is you as a leading scholar and also you're the editor, so that means you have seen many different studies regarding this issue. So do you think for our theme, the communication science was completely culture, in addition to your own observation, I also want to require that you think what we at science communication started, do you think always really make a difference? Yeah.
Well, I certainly hope so, because it's almost, I feel like, an obligation and responsibility, right? Because in our world today, we're dealing with so many very contested social issues, and people don't see eye to eye. We've seen so many examples in recent history, right? And I want to give you a concrete example based on my own work. So many of you who kind of tap into the risk world, you know that, even from the 1970s all the way to now, we know that, scientists, experts, and the general public, we see risk in very different ways, right? So for scientists and experts, they typically think of risk or problems we need to deal with in society as those that tend to kill a lot of people, and they're very catastrophic, and they're very urgent, or essentially they evaluate risk based on fatality, right? If this thing can kill a lot of people all at once, we definitely have to pay attention to it. But if it's like a slow progressing, long-term thing that we don't have to worry about right now, that's not something that a lot of the money or funding or research attention goes into, right? But from the general public's perspective, that's a very different thing. People think of risk in so many other different attributes and qualifiers, right? People think about, is this thing voluntary exposure? Do I have any controllability over this problem, right? So that's the difference between driving a car and flying on a plane, right? People think of driving a car as a safe option because they do it all the time and it's voluntary, they don't worry about it. Fly on the airplane, they don't have any control, right? So as you can see, the public and the experts actually think of a lot of risks and scientific matters in very different ways, which means some kind of communication, bridging the gap, translation is really important for the experts and the public to kind of talk to each other, right? Which is where kind of we come into this bigger scenario in our society as science communicators, risk communicators. I really think it's a responsibility for us to be able to make that, translation happen. And then the other thing I want to comment on very briefly is kind of going back to what you said before in terms of this kind of cross-disciplinary effort. And I think that is something that's also very heavily emphasized in America and in many other countries as well. So, if you look at, Shirley's work, my work, and I feel like a lot of people who have been very successful in an academic setting, right, in America and many other places, are those people that are able to kind of do this kind of cross-disciplinary type of interaction. Another concrete example, so lately I've actually been doing a lot of work on PFAS, which is called forever chemicals. Many of you probably have never heard of it, totally understandable. But the idea is that I've been working for close to 5 years now with chemists who study the actual part of, detecting and how do we mitigate and how do we study PFAS, from a chemistry perspective. But then all the findings that they have, if none of this made sense to the general public, to get people to pay attention to this, to think about what can we do to reduce exposure, what can we do to protect, children and more vulnerable populations about this, then the science itself, I don't want to say it's not valuable, it is still really valuable, but it's not going to do anything, right, to influence public opinion. So I think I definitely echo the sentiment that, not only interdisciplinary work is important, but we need to increasingly think about transdisciplinary when people are interested in solving the same big challenge. How do we really work together? But that really takes a lot of time, right, like I said. So, yeah, those are some good things.
Thank you. So, Shirley, Well, you are sharing your point. I also want to add that Singapore is long considered a connection of the Eastern and Western culture. So do you think this particular situation can also influence the topic we are discussing?
Indeed, yeah. I also echo what Herbert, and as well as Janet mentioned about interdisciplinary research. I think in Singapore it's a very unique situation where, as Professor Jia mentioned, there's the East-West kind of context. And I just want to maybe mention a little bit about my role in my university, Nanyang Technological University. I'm the Associate Vice President for Humanities, Social Science, and Research Communications in my university. And one of the key administrative roles and responsibility that I have is to ensure that there's interdisciplinary research between STEM and SHAPE. We don't call ourselves non-STEM in our university. We adopted a new acronym called SHAPE, Shaping Humanities, Social Science, Humanities, Arts, Research for People and the Economy. Okay, so pretty much similar to what UK has adopted. So my role is to strategize policies, for example, and also initiatives to encourage interdisciplinary research between STEM and SHAPE faculty across our university, as well as between universities. Yeah, so I think one important thing for science communication is that SHAPE faculty, science communication researchers cannot work alone. We have to engage with the scientists. We have to engage them, and likewise, they need to know who we are so that they can actually work with us in large interdisciplinary projects. And I say this because it also comes to my personal, my own research as well. In the course of the last decades, so I have been working with climate scientists and climate change projects, nuclear physicists, on nuclear energy projects, as well as large number of other topics that I do not have the expertise in. And it's very, very, it has come to a situation where I realize that actually scientists, they like to talk about their research, but they have trouble sometimes, putting things into layman's term. And as a result, they find it difficult to translate or explain their research to the general public. And that's where I think we as science communicators and researchers can come in to help bridge the gap. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Shirley just now raised a very important question for our science communication. As science communicator or scientists cannot work alone, they need to work together. But I think it is not simply a willingness to work together. It also needs a systematic work. So whether scientists and science communicators can work together is not just their own willingness. To give you an example, my own example, last year, our Suzhou University Vice President asked us, Professor Jia, you cannot only do your own academic research, you need to support our university's science communication. Yet, I said yes, and then I proposed to have a seminar to help our university scientists to how to communicate your science. And then people need to sign up for this seminar, and for the 2 weeks, the whole university, 5,000 faculty members, there's only 1 people sign up for my seminar to communicate, to help them communicate science. Yeah, so it's not simply a willingness issue. So I want to now transfer my example, my discussion to Herbert and Jianxun, because the other 3 panelists, you are from more developed system, very more established. But Herbert and Jianxun, what is your situation as whether there can be a systematic effort to make things happen, to communicate science, to create more, for creation of more content?
Yeah, that's a very good question. indeed, a lot of work has to go into it. In Nigeria currently, we are trying to reorganize the communication studies curriculum. Initially, you could go into the university for an undergraduate program and just study what we call mass communication or the communication arts. But recently, the National Universities Commission said no, you could unbundle so that people can come and do journalism, do information and media studies, do film and multimedia studies, or do broadcasting or film and all of that, about 8 of them. And I thought that that was going to be a big opportunity to mainstream science communication into each of these programs. But you know the way things usually go, those who were invited to do the thinking did it their own way, whereas they didn't do a big or a broad-based consultation to get people, more people involved. And so when we saw it, some of us complained. And in our own experience, I said to my colleagues, look, fine, the Universities Commission has given us the opportunity to develop 30% of the curriculum based on local needs. And now this is the opportunity we have to put in the things that we think are important. Because my argument is that we should stop treating communication studies from the point of view of systems, channels, newspapers, magazines, television, and all that. That communication should be studied on the basis of human problems, all right? Health problems, okay? Environmental problems, and other social problems. And so if you use communication in that sense, you end up developing people and not developing channels or systems. And so we said to ourselves, let us now take this opportunity and mainstream health communication into some of these programs, science communication into some of these programs, environmental communication into these programs. But then, you could also find colleagues who are resistant because they don't really understand. And I told you, I discovered science communication on my own through the internet because that was my own interest. But others may not share that same view. But to the best of our ability, those you can help convince will stay convinced and then help you do. Now, the other broader thing that can be done is for university authorities to say, if you are a scientist, you need to study communication courses to help you as scientists communicate science. And then if you are a humanist, you need to have science communication studies so that in your practice, you can communicate biology, you can communicate nanotechnology, you can communicate biotechnology, and all the emerging sciences and technologies available. But we haven't reached there yet. That's a problem on the ground. And it's good for us to have this kind of interface so that perhaps we can add more voices into it. These are some of the things I mentioned in the book TOS, edited, and the rest of them. We did a Nigerian chapter, and we tried to raise some of these issues. Perhaps it will get to much more ears and then get things solved in the right direction. Thank you.
Jianxun, what's your situation?
About this topic, I remember a story. I remember maybe 10 years ago, Professor Hans-Peter Peters, we discussed the scientists and the public, how to push the scientists. They have some motive, some of the actions to share the research to the public, to the mass media. But in Chinese traditional culture, they have a idiom, 人旁处离诸法状, which means the scientist is afraid to be famous, just like the pigs afraid to be fat. That is traditional, very traditional culture. But now something changed. I remember 10 years ago, I discussed with Hans-Peter why the scientists, one factor, maybe waste time. They really waste time. Another thing is they don't want to be famous to the public, just famous in the scientists' circle. That is very interesting thing. But now things change. Why? The culture changed because of the social media. I find that now a lot of the scientists, they want to, in the social media to explain something. This is our group research, but we want to share something. That's very interesting. So I think the society is changing, the media is changing, and the mind is changing. So we believe better and better in the future. Another thing that I want to introduce, our department in USTC is maybe is the cradle of the science communication in the mainland of China. Why? 1980s, we built the first subject department, just the name is the science communication, of the science communication, and some of the Suzhou University group also graduates our department, USTC. So this is how to say? It's a path. It's a path from the whole country, whole government, whole scientists. They have this kind of awareness to know the media, to share their research to the public. I think it's better now.
Thank you. Yeah, let me just add some background information. We really come from USTC because our founder, also the president of this conference, Professor Guoyan Wang, is from the USTC. And after she joined the Suzhou University, she invited me, and then we have a team here. Okay. So let's move on to Annie. Just now, Jianxun mentioned the social media. So, do you think in your situation, the social media really make a difference, or makes things better, or makes things worse?
I think so, eh? Yeah. Yeah, maybe before I answer that specific question, I think it's interesting to add an example from the Netherlands. In 2016, I started to work on a European project, which was called Nucleus. Where we work with different countries on the idea of responsible innovation, and also more broader what that meant for science communication, engagement, science education, but also research integrity. And one of the aspects that I did in that project was to analyze two different cases. So we had the European perspective on responsible innovation and what that meant. But I analyzed two cases, mainly China and South Africa. And that was in collaboration with the Beijing Association of Science and Technology and CRISP, the Chinese Research Institute for Popularization of Science. And I think what was interesting there is that we did not put the European perspective one-on-one to the Chinese or the South African perspective, so that we analyzed what was wrong or how much they did. But we try to look at the specific context and how the different elements of responsible innovation were already visible, for example, in those both other countries. And so that was a really interesting project. Amongst others, we also, I think, Lynn was involved. She also did a survey on researchers, why they would participate or not engage with the audiences. I think that was one step, because that was the analysis. Another step is, I think, that you try to translate it into what does that then mean, those analysis, what do they mean for how to communicate them in practice, and that is where the PCST network can come and play a role, because of our diverse communities and our experience by sharing at the conferences and the symposia. We can learn from each other, but also put it in perspective of the specific culture or the specific environment you're in. And I think that's really important. And then maybe back to the role of social media, and maybe in the Netherlands. So in the Netherlands we have now the kind of movement or the policy that researchers should communicate more and more engaged, in a broader sense, more engaged with science and society. And now the discussion in the Netherlands is that, well, if you want that, and you want researchers or scientists to engage, they are not trained. Also in the Netherlands, they are often not trained to do so. So that is also where science communication comes into play, because I think it's our task as well, to not analyze it, but also to provide or to develop training for researchers and how you can then engage with audiences, because science communication is so much more than only dissemination and outreach. If you know about that background and you learn about the background as a researcher, then you maybe know how to deal with social media, or you know how to deal, you can make choices in doing that, and understanding also the roles journalists have when they interact with you, in contrast to maybe the perspective you have as a researcher and the interest you want to convey as a researcher in a conversation about science or technology.
Okay, thank you. So Janet, in the Chinese theme of this roundtable, science controversy was also mentioned. So I want to ask you is, our English themes for cohesive culture, and do you think the science controversy, there's many controversies, and in fact, most of our science community study are focused on science controversy or related issues. So what do you think is the role of science controversy or the effort to deal with it as relative for this cohesive culture?
I think it definitely presents both challenges and opportunities, right? So one specific example that comes to mind immediately is that, so from what I've learned in the literature related to vaccination specifically, right? And you know, in America, there's a lot of controversy surrounding this topic. Not only related to the COVID-19 pandemic, but just controversy surrounding vaccine in general, right? So to share some concrete examples, back in the 1970s, 50 years ago, if you look at how the American public thought of vaccine, everybody's for it. Pretty much there's no controversy. Everybody thought it was a very important measure, public health measure, to help us, deal with diseases and crises and pandemics. But if you look at 2020, right, we used to be down here, basically. People think of it as not risk, know a lot, there's a lot of science behind it. 2020, it went basically the opposite direction. So over half of, I would say 47% of Americans, they're really concerned about any kind of vaccine, including childhood vaccine, right? And that's how we're seeing childhood diseases, measles and all those type of things are coming back, right? And that's obviously a very big public health crisis we need to deal with. So when you talk about controversy, that's really the first example that comes to mind, which really, I think that's where science communication is so much responsibility and opportunities to think about how do we explain the science and the necessities behind something that's so important, such as vaccination, to help the public, the general public, right, to understand, maybe not necessarily understand all the science behind it, right, but at least maybe to think about some other ways that we could convince people to still consider getting it, right? One thing comes to mind immediately, think about social norms, think about ethical responsibility, right? Think about if you don't vaccinate your kids, right, and he or she might give it to someone else who are younger and who cannot get vaccinated yet, right? So I think that's really where science communication, going back to some of the perspectives that are raised by the other panelists, it's not just disseminating of information, but really have to think about psychologically, socially, how do we present important controversies and scientific issues so that we could maybe subtly, right, nudge and persuade people into making better decisions, not only for themselves, but also for society at large, right?
Yeah, thank you. So, Shirley, Janet just now mentioned COVID, and Singapore has a really good example. So, can you brief us, do you think there's a role of science communication to help Singapore to better deal with the big impacts from COVID and other science-related issues?
So I think going back to COVID, COVID was gone. But, going back to COVID, I think in Singapore the situation is slightly different because we have a really efficient government who uses, strong communication and efficient and transparent way during COVID to disseminate information to the public. So from my perspective, and I've done some research as well on where we analyze government's communications, done content analysis that is funded by the National Research Foundation of Singapore, and we looked at how the government, used public communication during the COVID period to communicate to the public, and they don't necessarily use fear appeals. Okay, now if you don't get your vaccination now, you get into trouble. But they use methods like nurturance, for example, an approach like nurturance, and also approaches like humor. Getting people from I think more popular celebrity who tends to be on a humorous side, I think, to actually communicate the message to the public. So I think during the COVID, to answer your question, during the COVID period, the government do use good science communication measures and approaches, in my opinion, to communicate issues like vaccinations, and also tackling misinformation about COVID. How can the public deal with it? All sorts of related issues. Yeah, and I think based on my research, it's been shown that many of these scientific outcomes in science communication research have been adopted by our Singapore government. Yeah, and so I think I think the WHO has also publicly complimented the Singapore approach as well. So I think generally I think it's very positive. Yeah, and some of these communication methods that we have recommended, involving science and also perhaps health communication research, have been adopted by our country.
Thank you. Yes, now let's time to our audience. So any of you want to please ask a question or comment related to the issue or yeah. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Marie McEntee from New Zealand. I was just really Shirley on what you just said about COVID, because actually Singapore and New Zealand were very similar in their approach, and again both complimented for it. I think though, and it's a question I'd like to ask, is we need to be careful about suggesting that, like the COVID situation was, at the beginning there's a need for science communication, but then when the immunisations came in, there was a need for slightly different approaches, I would argue. And it's a bit more along Jenny's line this morning about a very reflexive approach to science communication, in recognising that communities sometimes have different levels of trust in government, different levels of who they might trust to come and work with them around vaccines. And that was when the vaccine came in. So at the beginning, we needed good science communication because we wanted to know what was going on. But when we came down to immunisation, we're complex now, and this is a contested space. And I think we need a more reflexive approach, I would argue, to science communication. And in that, our government openly admits that it needed to work, for instance, with Māori communities, and people who see things in different ways. And so it's just, I wondered your thoughts on that.
Again, I just want to say from Singapore's perspective as well that trust, I think you have rightly pointed out, I think trust is a key point here, when it comes to vaccination, especially in the context of Singapore. From my observation and also based on research, it's been shown that the public has a high level of trust with the Singapore government. And that actually underlines a lot of, that actually helps in terms of research, okay, in terms of science communication. And also when it comes to controversial technologies and science as well, you know, the general public in Singapore tends to believe, tends to have a high level of belief in what the government supports. And so that actually helps in that context. Unlike in other cultures and in America, for example, maybe the level of trust is slightly different, and hence, you know, there might be different approaches may be required when it comes to communicating COVID vaccination or other types of vaccination to the public. I think maybe Janet might be able to share.
For sure, because I actually have done quite a bit of work, and I definitely agree with you. I think a more reflective, I think that's the word you used, approach to science communication is really crucial. To give you concrete examples, and if you're interested, I can give you the specific papers to read that we published on COVID-19 vaccination specifically. But one key insight I really want to emphasize is that I think if you guys remember, right, when the first group of COVID-19 vaccine were approved, you know, the mRNA technology that was utilized in the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine, the scientists, if you remember, because it was so groundbreaking, it was so revolutionary, it was so exciting, all the media is focusing on how new and how novel and how amazing this technology is, right? So at the time, the scientific community, this elation, I think is totally understandable because they got vaccine in 6 months. That's unheard of, right? But what we learned later on is that, especially among those Americans who were really concerned about the COVID-19 vaccine and its safety, that's really what people hold on to as well, because they are thinking, 6 months, that's too soon, right? Do we know enough about the long-term effects? Do we know enough about whether it's safe, whether it's useful, whether we should be getting it into our body? And we actually found data on that, specifically that most people who were not vaccinated, even today, right, they were really worried about the unknownness behind the vaccine. So I think that's something, that's a really big lesson for us to learn from a science communication perspective, right? To think about when the scientists are focusing on the unknownness, on the uncertainty, and maybe even on something we simply do not have enough data or evidence to talk about, how do you relay that information to the public? Because they are hearing different things, right? You are thinking about new, novel, groundbreaking. They're thinking about uncertainty, unknown, ambiguity. So I think that's really important to take into consideration. The last thing is that, you know, we talk about cultural context. So, you know, think about America, this bi-party system that what we know today is that liberals, Democrats, there's an increased amount of trust and confidence in science generally, but among the Republicans and conservatives, it's been going downhill, right? So we're looking at a huge gap between confidence in science and scientific institutions. And that is something we definitely need to deal with, right, in terms of we're getting more polarized, not only on big controversial issues like climate change or vaccination, but probably also this very fundamental trust in science. There's also kind of like a divergent pathway, so.
Yeah. Thank you. Very interesting point, but we don't have time for the detailed discussion and the gap. But right now, let's have one final quick question from our audience. Oh. Yeah.
Thanks very much for. Thanks very much for the precious last opportunity. I'm a science curator and writer directed by China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I have a question for the panel. How do you think about the role of government, perhaps actions across nations in the field of cohesive cultures? Do you think the building of cohesive cultures in communicating science is or should be part of science diplomacy? Thank you.
Oh, Annie, you want to? Okay.
Just mention some of the cohesive culture in the Chinese context. That is, I think maybe it's not so difficult. You know, there is some of the Chinese traditional culture. If the scientists say it's okay, the public they believe. This is very interesting. But now there is two things. This part of scientists say yes. That part of scientists say no. That is problem for the public. Because the science they have a higher level. The common people, they believe the scientists. That is the first point. The second point about just like the COVID-19 or this kind of case, that's very special. Why special? It's dangerous. In time, we must respond in time. So we have a paper published these cases. There's a little different vaccine cases with other issues. So that is maybe some of other countries actually similar.
Yeah, but we don't have time. So, any of you want to make any panel? You want to make a very quick comment? Yeah. Okay.
Well, talking about culture, do we really need a cohesive culture? That's a question. Because, we have different races, we have different phenotypes and genotypes and all of that. Nothing can truly be very cohesive. But we should maybe harness our differences in language, in styles of doing things. And it's a science culture, a universal culture. For instance, you have the Chinese medicine, we have African medicine, but if they solve the same problem, that becomes a universal culture. But there will be different roots, different leaves, but they're solving the same problem. So, in the long term, what appears as if is a non-cohesive culture becomes a cohesive one.
Yeah, thank you. Any more quick comment?
Maybe one example from, I think also maybe responding to the role of the government. In the Netherlands, I'm also a volunteer of the Science Cafe, and we had one of the main scientists working on in the World Health Organization as well on COVID. Just 1 month before the pandemic started in the Netherlands, he was telling about the research, the virus, how they already had parts for the vaccine on the table, so to say, because it's based on other research, etc. And that helped really for me personally to understand why it could be a shorter period. So she explained the process. In the Netherlands, that was also not communicated, so there's also a lot of debate. I think there's a role for the government there, that they also inform themselves or work with, let themselves advise what I think has happened in Singapore and in New Zealand by researchers, by science communication research, and then you can put it better into practical needs for people in society, for citizens.
Thank you. Yeah, very interesting talk, but we really don't have more time. So thank you for every panelist for your contribution, for your insight, and for our audience for your attention and for your input. And we will have to stop here and maybe it's your turn.
Thank all of you. Thanks.